She had arrived on the jungle moon of Veridon Prime with nothing but her field kit, a remote post assignment, and the warning: "They don't like humans." For the first few weeks, it was quiet. Too quiet. No contact from other species. No signs of other researchers. Just her, the trees, and the strange rustling of leaves that always seemed to follow at a distance. The Umbra Striders were what they were called by those few who had survived close encounters. Alien panther-like beasts, jet black with intelligent gold eyes and near silent paws. She was warned they didn't take kindly to outsiders interfering. But she wasn't here to interfere. Just observe, report, and treat any injured wildlife. She'd built her shelter away from their usual territory, logged her activities precisely, and never crossed a trail twice in one day. Still, they watched. Always watched. She would set out food samples for other creatures, and they would be gone by morning, but the Striders never took bait. Once, she spotted one near the edge of a riverbank. Massive, scarred, unblinking. She froze. It growled low, like thunder inside her chest, then vanished as if the forest swallowed it. She knew better than to pursue. The jungle had its own rules, and she was a guest, tolerated at best. The council had protocols: avoid provocation, never approach the packs, don't interfere with their young. She followed every rule. Still, she felt their presence daily. Scratches appeared on bark, as if marking her perimeter. Her gear was sometimes moved slightly. It didn't feel like hostility, but it didn't feel like trust either. Just attention. She recorded everything, but the logs never captured the feeling that something else was always near. Then came the night of the storm. Thick gray clouds rolled across the violet sky, thunder crashing in strange intervals. The jungle dimmed unnaturally fast. The rains hit hard, turning trails into rivers and leaves into pounding drums. In the middle of preparing her supplies against flooding, she heard it, a cry. Sharp, short, and desperate. Not human. Not anything she'd catalogued before. It came from the eastern gorge, a place marked as high risk due to unstable cliffs and flash flooding. She paused, then reached for her boots. Another cry, closer this time, shorter, like it was losing strength. Her heart pounded. Could be a wounded bird. Could be a decoy. Could be a dying strider. She didn't know. But she couldn't sit still. Not with that sound in her ears. She grabbed her med pack, waterproofed it fast, and ran. The rain nearly blinded her. The jungle roots pulled at her boots. Vines slapped her arms. Her body ached from old bruises, but she moved with instinct. As she neared the river's edge, the roar of water grew overwhelming. Then she saw it. A dark, writhing shape caught in the current, small, frantic limbs flailing, slipping under again and again. A cub. Umbra cub. Its eyes locked with hers just once as it was thrown against a rock. Blood colored the foam. Her breath caught. Her mind screamed, asterisk, stay out of it. Don't interfere, asterisk, but her body didn't listen. She tossed her gear aside, ripped off her jacket, and dove. The cold was a slap. The current caught her legs, spun her sideways, but she clawed forward. The cub was closer now, floating face down. She reached, missed, kicked harder, grabbed fur. It didn't struggle. Too weak. She wrapped her arms around it and twisted toward shore, but a hidden current slammed her against a stone wall. Her side exploded in pain. She grit her teeth and pulled. The shore was a blur. Trees like shadows. Each breath burned. She collapsed on the mossy edge, body shielding the cub. Blood ran from her arm, ribs throbbed, and her vision flickered. The cub coughed once, alive. That was enough. She tried to speak, but the jungle offered no comfort. Only silence. Then, a crunch of leaves. Then another. Eyes. So many eyes in the darkness. Yellow. Watching. A low hum echoed in her skull. Not growls. Not warning. Something older. Recognition? She blinked, trying to stay conscious. Her fingers brushed the cub's side, feeling its tiny heartbeat. Her voice came out broken, but the words slipped through her lips. You're safe now. Then darkness took her. The cold bit into her as the current dragged her under again. Rocks scraped her limbs, and her lungs begged for air, but her grip didn't loosen. The cub hung limply in her arms, waterlogged and heavy. She kicked, twisted, let the flow spin her until her shoulder slammed into a boulder. Pain flared down her spine, but she used the momentum to push up. Her head broke the surface, and she coughed hard, choking on river water. The cub stirred slightly, its tiny chest moving with shallow breaths. She fought to keep its head above water, her free arm pulling with each desperate stroke. The rain blurred her vision. Branches whipped past. Twice she lost footing trying to reach the bank, each time pulled farther downstream. She wasn't sure how long she struggled. Her muscles screamed, her ribs ached, but she kept moving. Not because of duty or training, because she couldn't watch it die. Finally, the river spit them onto a muddy slope. She clawed at roots, dragging herself and the cub from the water's reach. Her limbs trembled. Her breaths came in gasps. Her heart felt too fast, like it might give out. The cub was still alive, but barely. A large gash above its eye trickled blood. She tore a strip from her undershirt and pressed it against the wound. No tools. No antiseptic. Just hands and instinct. She sat there for minutes, holding it close, letting body heat transfer. The forest remained silent around her. No calls. No footsteps. Just wind and rain. Her vision swam. She leaned back against a tree, clutching the cub to her chest. "You're going to make it," she whispered. Her voice sounded distant, almost not her own. Time blurred. She didn't know if she drifted into sleep or unconsciousness, only that when she opened her eyes again, the storm had calmed. The jungle glistened with rain. The cub was still breathing. She tried to stand, but her knee gave out. Her side radiated pain. Something felt cracked. Maybe a rib. Maybe more. She scanned the treeline, half expecting the pack to charge. Nothing moved, but the air felt dense, like something unseen weighed down on her. She pulled herself upright using a twisted root. The cub whimpered. She winced, adjusted her hold, and started limping toward her shelter. Every step was agony. Roots tried to trip her. Insects buzzed her ears. Blood soaked through her shirt. Her arms ached from holding the cub, but she didn't let go. She passed trees with familiar marks, scratches made by large claws. Symbols. Warnings. Yet none of the striders appeared. The shelter was a dull gray shadow through the trees when she finally collapsed again. The pain in her leg flared sharp, and her body refused to rise. She dragged herself forward using her elbows. Another 20 meters. 10. She reached the door, slapped it open, and fell inside. She laid the cub on a folded blanket and blacked out. She awoke to darkness. The storm was gone. Moonlight filtered through the cracks in the walls. Her body throbbed, but something felt off. The shelter smelled different, cleaner, sharper, like crushed herbs. She turned her head and noticed leaves bound around her arm, a thick green paste applied to her side. Her gear had been moved. Tools laid out neatly. Her bag had been emptied, medical kit spread open as if someone had used it. The cub lay beside her, sleeping. Its wound cleaned. Bandaged with the same care she would have given any patient. She blinked, trying to make sense of it. No one else lived within 100 miles. No humans. No settlers. Only the pack. She sat up slowly, vision swimming, pain flaring again. Her water flask had been refilled. Berries rested beside her bedroll. Strange ones, not local, not from any catalog she knew. Still, the message was clear. She wasn't alone. The cub stirred, ears twitching, eyes fluttering open. It looked at her and didn't flinch. Instead, it pressed its head gently against her side and purred, a low, soft hum that vibrated through her chest. She reached out, brushing her fingers over its ear. "You're safe," she said again, softer now. Then came the sound, soft pads moving outside the shelter, just out of view. Not a threat. Not hunting. Watching. She didn't move. Just listened. The pack hadn't intervened during the rescue. They'd let her dive. Let her fight. But they hadn't abandoned the cub completely. They'd followed. Helped. Not with words, but through quiet, deliberate actions. She laid back, head resting against her jacket, mind racing. The jungle didn't reward foolishness. It respected strength, sacrifice, and courage. The Striders had seen something in her. Enough to let her live. Enough to let her care for one of their own. Not trusted. Not yet. But no longer ignored. The morning after the storm, everything had changed. Her body still ached, ribs bruised and knees stiff, but she moved with care, noticing every shift around her. The shelter remained quiet, but outside it, the forest didn't feel the same. The tension she'd lived under for weeks had shifted. Still no Striders in sight, yet she could feel them closer now. The cub stuck to her like a shadow. Every step she took, it followed. It mimicked her movements, responded to her voice, and no longer flinched at her touch. She called it Echo, not for any particular reason at first, but later she realized it reflected the jungle's reply to her act. Echo's gaze was too alert, too aware. It wasn't a normal animal. It watched her, learned from her. Every morning new signs appeared. Not random. Precise. Her med kit had been adjusted. Containers refilled. Rations she hadn't collected appeared near her door. Nuts, berries, meat, all neatly arranged. She hadn't gone that deep into the jungle herself. Someone else had. Claw marks on trees formed specific shapes. Always vertical, never random. As if meant to communicate. She stopped logging everything through standard protocols. The situation was no longer clinical. This wasn't a controlled study. This was interaction. Not overt, not conversational, but consistent. Patterns emerged. Her traps weren't just checked, they were reset better than she'd placed them. Her tools were cleaned with surprising thoroughness. Echo showed no fear of the deeper jungle now. On walks, it would lead her to spots where rare herbs grew. Once, it sat beside a rock, whining until she approached. Under it, she found water-purifying moss she'd never catalogued. It was like the cub understood her needs, and made sure the pack did too. By the fourth day, she stopped asking why. She accepted. A quiet rhythm developed. She cooked small portions, set a second bowl for Echo. After meals, the bowl was always gone. Returned the next morning, cleaned. Not by rain. Deliberate. She began talking aloud during her routines, not for communication, but to leave something behind, in case they listened. She described her tools, her pain, her memories. Echo always listened. Sometimes she thought she saw movement at the edge of the tree-line when she spoke. Shapes low to the ground, unmoving, yet definitely present. Once, she left her datapad outside by accident. It recorded a brief audio clip overnight. Faint breathing. Heavy steps. But also something else, a sound like stone against bark. When she played it back, she paused at a repeated rhythm. 5 beats. A pause. Then 3 more. She looked through old research and matched it with a forgotten field note from a xenolinguist. Basic numbers. Pack identifiers. The realization hit hard. They weren't just watching her. They were marking time. Recording presence. Not for her. For each other. She was being counted. Catalogued. Assessed. She didn't run. There was no point. If they meant harm, they'd have done it already. Instead, she offered acknowledgement. Each evening, she'd walk just far enough to place a fruit or carved stone along the border trees. A silent exchange. A symbol. She didn't know what they did with them. They were always gone by morning. Echo started practicing movements she hadn't taught it. Crouching low, mimicking predator patterns. Once, it dragged a small rodent to her and waited. Not for food, but for approval. She patted its head, and it let out that soft rumble again. On the 8th day, her med kit was fully stocked again. But none of it was hers. The tools were older, more worn. Sterilized by heat, not chemical. bandages stitched from leaves. Salves she couldn't identify but worked better than anything in her standard pack. Gifts or resources shared. Not human. Not made for her. But adjusted to her size and wounds. That night, when she slept, Echo curled beside her. She dreamed of soft growls layered over wind. Not threatening, curious. When she woke, there were fresh claw marks on the shelter wall. 2 vertical, 1 cross-hatched. Different from the others. She traced them with her finger and felt something shift in her chest. They weren't warnings. They were names. She understood then that the jungle wasn't merely a backdrop. It was alive in its own way, a network of silent watchers and ancient rituals. And she had crossed some invisible threshold. Not just tolerated. Not just observed. She had become something more than a guest. She was being invited to remain. The peace didn't last. The jungle never remained still for long. She noticed it first in the air, heavier, disturbed, as if the balance had shifted. The birds that normally sang in early bursts had gone quiet. Echo's ears twitched more often. The claw-mark symbols around her shelter were fresh, newer than usual, and increased in number. Warning, not ritual. She paid attention. Every movement outside now came with an edge of unease. The scent of smoke came next, faint and chemical, unlike anything natural to Didnt Prime. Then came the tracks, deep, boot-shaped imprints in damp soil, heavier than hers, deliberate, made by people who didn't care about hiding. She followed them cautiously. Broken branches, scorched moss, and left-behind wrappers confirmed it. Unauthorized presence. Poachers. She tried her comms, but there was only static. The satellite link was jammed, likely disabled by the intruders. She moved fast, returning to Echo, then gathered her emergency gear. Echo sensed something was wrong. It stayed close, tense, bristled. That night, the forest lit briefly with artificial glare. A flare burst over the canopy. Loud footsteps, hushed voices, the clicking of metal. Armed hunters. They weren't here for supplies. They were hunting. She knew the Umbra pack was close. Knew these men had no idea what kind of intelligence they were provoking. She tried to leave signs, symbols she'd copied, patterns the Striders had taught her. Maybe the pack would understand. Maybe not. Either way, she couldn't run. Not when she knew what the poachers might do if they caught one of the young, or worse, if they saw Echo with her. The first trap triggered at dawn. A metallic snap echoed across the valley. She found it 5 minutes later, a mechanical snare with traces of blood on the jaws and fur. Not Echo's, but close. The scent confirmed it. One of the pack was wounded. By midday, the poachers were closing in. Their scanners picked up motion near the gorge. She and Echo tried to slip past, but the moment she crossed the old river trail, a beam of light pinned her. A warning shot followed. She ducked, shielding Echo. A voice barked orders in a language she didn't recognize, but the tone was clear. They'd seen her. She was now a target. She ran. Echo kept pace, low and silent. But the terrain slowed her. Muddy inclines, tangled vines, exposed roots. Another flare shot up behind her, painting the trees in harsh orange. They were circling. She knew she wouldn't outrun them. The moment she crossed into the low basin, she tripped. Her leg gave out again, pain surging as she hit the ground. Echo turned and snarled at the shadows behind. The lead poacher emerged, armor scuffed, rifle aimed. His mask hid his face, but not the intent. He raised the barrel, pointed directly at Echo. That's when the jungle answered. It didn't begin with a roar. It started with silence, so total, so unnatural, that even the poacher paused. Then movement. Black shapes dropped from the trees, fast and soundless. The Umbra pack. Dozens of them. Their eyes gleamed gold, and their bodies moved with surgical precision. The first to strike did so without sound. The rifle clattered to the ground. The man fell before he realized he'd been hit. The others tried to react, but the pack moved as one. They didn't just attack, they dismantled. Targeted weapons first, then hands, then legs. She watched, stunned, as the jungle turned from predator to executioner. One poacher managed to fire once. It went wide. He didn't get a second chance. Within moments, the chaos ended. The survivors fled into the dark, broken and terrified. The Umbra pack stood still, surrounding her. Echo pressed against her side, unharmed. The matriarch approached, larger than the others, her fur streaked with faint gray. She stared down at the fallen rifle, then up at the woman. There was no sound. Just that look, piercing, ancient. Not anger. Not dominance. Acknowledgement. Then the matriarch turned away. The pack followed her, fading into the undergrowth like they'd never been there. No growls. No threats. Only quiet. Echo remained, eyes locked on hers. The message was clear. The jungle hadn't just defended its own. It had defended her. Pain pulsed through every inch of her body, but she stayed awake. Echo curled close, his warmth steady, protective, familiar. Her arm was swollen, ribs tender with every breath, and she knew infection had set into one of the deeper cuts. Yet she didn't feel fear. Not anymore. The jungle wasn't hostile, it was simply honest. It took what it must, but it remembered. As night fell, something changed. Echo stood up slowly, ears twitching, gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the clearing. She followed his line of sight. Shadows moved between the trees, low, deliberate steps. They didn't hide anymore. One by one, the Umbra emerged, flanking her shelter, circling without aggression. Their eyes weren't threatening. They were calm. Focused. Then the matriarch stepped forward. Even in low light, she radiated presence, aged muscle, elegant scars, wisdom carved into her frame. Her gaze met the humans again, direct and unblinking. Not wild. Not bestial. Entirely aware. She didn't make a sound. She lowered her massive head until her forehead hovered inches from the woman's chest, then pressed forward gently. A gesture of acceptance. The pressure brought tears to her eyes, not from pain but from something deeper. Echo stepped between them, placed a paw over her knee, and released a low, resonant hum. One by one, the other striders joined, forming a half-circle. None growled. None stalked. They simply stood beside her, a formation like a rite. She never felt more still in her life. Surrounded by creatures once thought untamable, she sensed no malice. The jungle had judged her. Not by her species, not by past mistakes. By her actions. It had watched her carry one of their own through near death, had seen her choose to bleed rather than abandon, and now it chose to respond. One of the younger males stepped forward carrying something in his jaws, a curved bone, bleached smooth, etched with symmetrical lines. He laid it at her feet, backed away. She recognized the carvings. A pattern she'd seen before on tree bark, but cleaner, more precise. It wasn't a warning. It was a name. A symbol of inclusion. She reached forward, fingers trembling, and picked it up. It felt warm, heavier than it looked. As she held it, the pack let out a synchronized sound, not a howl, not a growl. A deep, layered hum that vibrated through the air and her chest. A sound of memory. Of acknowledgement. She understood now. This wasn't gratitude in the human sense. It was legacy. The cub had survived not by chance, but through her defiance of the rules. She had taken responsibility for a life the jungle itself had written off. That mattered. It meant something beyond language. The matriarch turned again, and the formation broke. One by one, they slipped into the jungle's folds, each parting as fluid as mist. No footsteps. No sound. Only Echo stayed. The message was clear. He wasn't a ward anymore. He was her kin. And through him, so were they. As dawn crept through the leaves, she sat with the carved token in her hands and thought about everything she'd been told before arriving: protocols, distance, non-interference. All of it wrong. They hadn't needed space. They'd needed truth, consistency, and sacrifice. She rose slowly, pain sharp but manageable, and stepped outside. Echo followed, tail brushing against her leg. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The jungle didn't want words. It wanted action. Memory. A bond written in silence, sealed in blood. She looked at the trees, the symbols carved high above the ground now forming a new line, one she hadn't noticed before. They weren't for her alone. They were for others. For the pack. A record. A marker that said someone lived, someone saved, someone belonged. The silence of the jungle wasn't empty anymore. It was full of breath, of presence, of watching. She'd come as an outsider. She stayed as a stranger. But now, she remained as part of something older than her understanding. Not because she demanded it. Because she earned it.